Dr. Jazz.
Where
Dr.
is
Jazz.
your location?
I'm in Slovenia, Europe, former Yugoslavia.
Oh, wow.
You probably
Okay, I didn't
played
know
here.
that. All right.
Yeah,
I have played there.
probably with Sam
Muhal
Rivers
Richard
and some
Abrams, I
Mughal.
was there with.
Wow, really?
Right.
When were you here with Mughal?
So, and I think I was there, I've been there twice. I think the first time I was there with Henry Threadgill.
Ooh, wow, nice. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. But thank
So
you.
how would you like to get started here?
I mean, you said I tried to search for the new album, Impact, right? But I couldn't find it anywhere to listen to. I mean, I have your older albums, and I really love that stuff, And uh, I want to start first of you as like as a composer. I like Strike Force and Voyage and all those amazing albums you did. But can you tell me about the new album a little bit? You said it just came out, and what's the story behind it?
Yeah, the album is called Impact, and at some point you will send me your address, and I will get a couple of copies right out to you.
Yay!
Well, first of all, um, I was encouraged a lot by Dr. Muhal Richard Abrams to start composing for larger pieces, larger ensembles. And with his encouragement and support, 2000, I began writing 2016
Hmm.
of taking lessons for composition for chamber orchestra. So I would like to start there from the lessons because I had never written music for an ensemble larger than, say, 9 or 10 pieces. So I, at the time, I was a professor at Bard College, and I went to the faculty. And of course, I know everybody in the music faculty, and they were ready to come to my rescue for writing for chamber orchestra. So after 3 months of studying compositions and looking at scores, she ended up going back to Europe for some medical treatment. So I was kind of left on my own. And fortunately, I started thinking about, well, who is close to me living upstate here that I could take composition lessons. And then, of course, I thought of my close, good friend, James Zimmery, who's a guitarist.
Mm-hmm.
And he has written, I think, 3 or 5 chamber scores. So I actually started studying some with James. He got me started in terms of the layout of instruments and the staff. And of course, after 3-4 months with James, I was left on my own. So now I have about 8-9 months of studying composition under my belt. So then I turned to my music paper, and this is before I learned a music program.
Yeah.
I was doing my first score was done by hand,
Oh
the
man,
old-fashioned way.
that's heavy.
Yes. And I began writing my first chamber score entitled Southside Suite. And Southside Suite is a culmination of many, many different styles of music that I was experienced to on the south side of Chicago. Blues, jazz, and at the time, Chicago, the south side of Chicago was very active in terms of live music. So I heard a lot of live music during this period in the early 60s. So the music of Southside Suite is a culmination of all these many different styles that I was exposed to. The AACM was where I actually was exposed to contemporary music. In addition to that, we were very active around the University of Chicago at the time. We performed concerts, students organized concerts, and a lot of this new music began to take place at the U of C. So it was a lot of music I was exposed to, and I wanted to put this together. So I began writing in this contemporary style for chamber orchestra. That was my first piece, and it was premiered at Bard College in 2017. That experience only inspired me to do more. By the time we get to 2019, because it took me a while to get this music out there, when we got to 2019, this was in the beginning of the pandemic. So now I'm spending more time Zooming, teaching on Zoom. And at the same time, over the radio, as I began writing my second score, which ended up being Pandemic Fever, I began writing my second score in the spring of 2019. And since I'm teaching and Zooming my classes at home, I'm exposed to these conflicting reports coming across the radio about the pandemic. By this time, Bard College had pretty much closed down because this was the beginning. So all of my teaching happened on Zoom. Somehow, Samo, all the information that was coming at me while I'm at home teaching and composing music ended up going into the score. So as a result, Pandemic Fever came out totally different than I had expected. How was it different? Well, first of all, these lines and melodies were a response of all the information that was coming over the radio, and somehow it found itself into the score. So what we have are harmonically a lot of dissonance. The harmonies that are used mostly in Pandemic Fever were a major seventh chord sharp fives.
Kind of augmented.
So the chords were augmented. Yes. And most of the harmonies were used from that chord. The rhythms that were also in the score were, I would say, a combination of half notes, 16th notes, and a lot of rhythms that were disjointed.
Mm.
You understand
Yeah,
what I
sure.
mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So now we have dissonant in harmonies, but we also have rhythms that were disjointed. They were not connected, okay? And when the score was finished, it turned out to be totally different than I expected. And it turned out to be a Pandemic Fever. And fortunately, this score was premiered in 2019 in New York.
Mm.
From that score, I received an award, a NISCA award for composition.
Mm.
So now I'm really getting encouraged because now I have an idea of what I'm doing. Okay? I have some idea of what I'm doing and composing for large orchestra. So Pandemic Fever was premiered in New York, and it was performed by the SEM Ensemble under the conduction of Peter Kotick,
Mm-hmm.
who travels quite a bit to Europe as a conductor performing. So from this NISCA award for composition I received in 2021, I began writing my third score, which is called Mr. Speedster. And Mr. Speedster is about a man who is teaching himself to navigate around the computer, but somehow he's working on the computer and he realizes that the computer is not as fast as you want it to be. But you continue navigating and learning from these programs. And now that you're getting work done a lot faster, you end up doing more work because you have more time. And when you add in more work, you finally find yourself in the same place you were before.
Exactly.
So that's why that piece is called Mr. Speedster. What I learned from Mr. Speedster, and I got a lesson from each one of my scores. What I learned from Mr. Speedster was the fact that I wanted to have some contrasting moods in a score. This piece is about movement, Mr. Speedster. So I have a fast theme that continues throughout the score in 16th notes, while the woodwinds and what's creating these fast passages is the piano and the xylophone and the piano mostly, because that's the one instrument that can repeat over and over again at a fast tempo. But what I'm trying to create in Mr. Speedster is movement, slow movement, fast movement, and how they balance each other out. I have the woodwinds acting as a neutralizer to tell the composer, look, we have to slow down. We're moving too much at a fast pace. The tempo of America is almost like it was in the 40s. Everything is operating double time. You understand what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
Mr. Speedster represent where we are now with technology. Everything seems to be sped up.
Yep.
We're traveling faster. We're trying to get to the moon. We're accomplishing things at a fast pace, and everything is about speed. That's what Mr. Speedster is about.
Oh, yes.
So now I am working on my fourth score, and so since the jazz scene has shifted, there's not much touring going on.
Yeah.
And as a result, I had to shift gears and put a lot of my energies into writing and composing. Yeah. So that's what that's the mode I'm in right now, because I still have this energy to create, but the performance aspect of this industry is not what it used to be. So I've turned my attention to composing.
Yeah.
And at this point, when I finish this present composition that I'm doing now, first of all, the composition is a concerto for drum set and orchestra.
Oh, beautiful.
This is what I've had in mind, because in all three of my scores, I've included drum set in addition to the percussion section, because it allows me to take part in all the fun in the score. You understand?
Sure.
I mean, why should everyone else have all the fun when I could be a part of this? And so I've included drum set, and now that I have a better idea about writing for chamber orchestra, now I'm ready to write my first concerto for drum set and orchestra.
Beautiful. Ah, fantastic.
Thank you.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, looking forward to hearing that when it comes out. So beautiful.
Yes, you will get an idea of it when you receive Impact.
Super. Looking forward. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thurman, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Chicago before, like 60s, and I listened today to Levels and Degrees of Light by Mughal.
Yes.
And you were like 19, I guess, or 18 back then on that record. How did you become involved with Mughal and your relationship with him? And playing that music especially. I mean, it's so progressive still now, you know, if you put it on, it's...
I met Mughal like in 1965. Muhal's son, Mughal has kids. His older son was my age, and we were running buddies. We were in freshman, second year high school together. And one day he told me that his father is a musician and that I should meet him. And I said, really? What does your father play? And he said, my father plays piano. I said, wow, I really would like to meet him. So Monday evening came around, and he took me down to Lincoln Center on the south side of Chicago, which was a community center. And the experimental band rehearses there every Monday nights. And this is under the direction of Dr. Mughal Richard Abrams. So when I got down there, we're in the basement. The first thing I hear is 5 saxophone players playing together. And I had never seen 5 saxophones play together like this, especially not by, musicians of color, And these 5 musicians were Roscoe Mitchell, Joseph Jarman, Gene Dinwiddie, who played tenor, and William Van Allen, who played baritone, and Henry Threadgill. And they were playing saxophone quartets and duets. I mean,
Wow.
saxophone quartets and quintets. And they were in another room, but that was the first sound I heard of AACM.
Wow.
So when Muhal called the band together, Muhal started passing out the music, and his son name is Bucks. Bucks said, "Hey, I want you to meet a friend of mine, and he plays drums." And Muhal looked at me and said, "Nice to meet you. And would you like to sit in?"
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Well, maybe I should sit and observe first," which I did. And after the rehearsal, I read the music. I did sit in. Everyone seemed to be happy with what I did. Joseph Jarman comes over to me and he says, "Look, would you like to rehearse and play some my music?"
Oh, wow.
And I said, "I would love to." And that's how it all began. Muhal, after the rehearsal, Muhal said, "Are you free on Mondays?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you should come back."
Mm.
And I did come back. Now, keep in mind, there are other drummers down there.
Sure.
So I'm a little intimidated by these drummers because I'm the youngest one in the building. That's why I was a little hesitant about sitting in at first. But once I realized there was music to be played, written music, then I felt secure enough to sit in because I felt, well, I saw the music and I said, well, I could do this. So the fact that they welcomed me, the AACM and everyone there, I did come back. And after the third or fourth rehearsal, Muhal invited me to a meeting and explained to me about the organization and wanted to know if I would like to be a member. And by this time, I felt welcome. I felt support. And most important, I really liked the music that was going down. It was music that I'd never heard before because it was original. It was music that required my skills of reading. I liked that. And most important, it required me to not only use stick, but I had to use brushes. I had to use mallets. And this was new for me because of the gigs that I was doing around Chicago. You basically are playing with sticks all the time. And sometimes a ballad you play with brushes. But I attend the meeting, and 60 years later, here I am, a member of this organization that has had a huge impact on the music scene in Chicago, a huge impact on the music scene in New York, and a huge impact on the music scene in Europe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was very fortunate that Muhal's son felt that he wanted me to father, and his father is this musician, and that's where it all started.
That's so beautiful. Wow. Amazing. Quite a cool story.
I haven't, yeah, I haven't looked back. And the next thing I know, Muhal was at, and after rehearsing with Joseph Jarman, and I realized that this is something I can get into. Samo, excuse me just a minute. So,
I will cut that also.
Yeah, levels and degrees of light was very special. But before I get to that, rehearsing with Joseph Jarman's quartet. Now, that started when Steve McCall, well, at the time, Joseph had a sextet, actually. He had Lester Lashley on trombone. He had Billy Brinfield on trumpet and Fred Anderson on saxophone, Charles Clark on bass, Steve McCall on drums. At this time, Steve McCall was getting very busy going back and forth to Europe because he was playing with Gunther Hampel. You ever heard of Gunther Hampel?
Yeah, of course, sure. Yeah.
So Steve McCall was getting ready to go on tour with Gunther Hampel. Immediately, oh, one more thing. Joseph Jarman was using two drummers at the time. I'll think of his name in a minute. Arthur. He was from New Orleans, I think. But Jarman was using two drummers. This was the first time I'm playing with another drummer. But I liked it because I had seen James Brown, the singer, his band had two drummers. So this was exciting to me. So we were rehearsing, and Joseph Jarman at the time was reading poetry along with playing saxophone. So that was different for me. And the poet that we were working with, his name was Ken Nordine. Now, Ken Nordine was pretty active and pretty famous during the 60s as a poet. I didn't know this, no. But here I am working with Joseph Jarman in a concert, and we have this famous poet, Ken Nordine, here. So all of a sudden, I find myself in the company playing professionally with these contemporary musicians playing original music. And I really enjoyed it because it gave me freedom to play drums the way I wanted to play.
Yep.
So we recorded Song 4. That was our first album on Delmark. A year later, Joseph recorded the album As If It Were the Seasons. Now we get to Levels and Degrees of Light. This was my first recording with Muhal Richard Abrams. And Muhal had a poet and a singer. And Muhal played piano, and he also played clarinet. And I had never been in the company of this music before, with a poet and a singer and this new music. So that was my first recording with Muhal. And as a result, I ended up recording 4 more albums with Dr. Muhal Richard Abrams. And by this time, I'm getting very active in the AUCM. Why? Well, number one, Alvin Fielder, who was also the drummer with Roscoe Mitchell and his quintet, he was getting very busy with his work as a pharmacist. So he wasn't making rehearsals too much on Mondays. Also, as time goes on, we're like in 67, 68 now, 69. King Mock, who's a drummer, he was involved. He ended up going to Europe. A. Geramo, he's a drummer. He ended up going on the road with Gene Ammons and Amita Claudine Myers. That was part of when Gene Ammons returned back to the music scene. He took A. Geramo, Gerald Donovan, that's his other name, and Amina, and they went on the road. So what I'm getting to, the drum chair was left pretty much to me. Okay. And so I became a regular member in the experimental band. So that's how it all started. When I look back on that period, it was a period where the organization was blossoming. We were growing. We were developing our ideas. We were the organization became whole. It was working. We had a concert series in the spring, summer, fall.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And the community on the south side of Chicago saw us as we were, they saw us as a movement as an organization that the community could support.
Yeah.
They liked the idea that this music they were listening to came out of their own neighborhood. So they saw themselves actually as part of the organization, even though they were not members, but they felt they were a part of the organization.
Yeah.
And that was very positive. That was left a positive effect on me because we were supported. They attended all of our concerts. And this was all community support. And I'm not talking about only music lovers. I'm speaking of photographers. I'm speaking of painters. I'm speaking of designers. The organization grew out of the south side of Chicago, and out of that, other artists saw that we were making something happen, and we were independent.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a home away from home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I wrote my orchestra score and when I was in production with Impact, I felt this was an opportunity to let the music world and the world know the impact that Dr. Muhal had on me as a person, and it was a way of giving something back to him and acknowledging him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
important. Yeah. Beautiful. Thurman, I just wanted to go, I listened today to, I ordered when it came out the Archive series, you know, on new No Business Records by Sam Rivers, which you're featured on also with the quartet. And I look at the records I have you on. I have you on so many records, and the era,
Huh,
like from 1976 to 79, you played like in those revolutionary ensembles by Anthony Braxton, you know, the creative orchestra, and Sam
right.
Rivers quartet. How did you navigate all that, and how was it for you working in those different, you know, Sam's band was different than Anthony's. Like, how was that for you?
I'm glad you asked that question. Fortunately, Sam Rivers, Anthony Braxton, the World Sax Quartet, Oliver Lake,
Yeah.
they were all managed out of the same office. So that from 76 to 1980, I had traveled to Europe probably a course of maybe 30 times.
Yeah,
I mean,
man,
in
that's
the
crazy.
course of
Wow.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So you asked me how I managed it. Fortunately, I didn't have to manage it. The and I'll all of this work came out of this office entitled Outward Vision, which was managed by a guy by the name of Marty Kahn. And Marty Kahn managed the World Saxophone Quartet, Oliver Lake, Anthony Braxton, Sam Rivers, maybe
Yeah.
somebody else. Yeah. And so I didn't have to do anything. I would finish up a tour in the spring with Braxton in March and April, return home for a week, and go back out with Sam Rivers for another 6 weeks.
That's amazing.
Then I would go back out, and then I would come home for maybe a month, and I would go back out in August for which Braxton doing the Philosoph Festival and whatever else. So I traveled to Europe so much I had to get a new passport and get an extension. Yeah,
Oh
I had to
man.
get an extension on my passport. That was a very active period for me, but it was also the most creative period
Yeah, I mean,
in my playing.
yeah.
I had between Braxton and Sam Rivers, and let's not leave out
Cecil,
Leroy
man.
Jenkins.
Yeah, and
Yes, and
Cecil as well.
Buhol.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is that period was very big, and I am blessed to have worked with some of the most innovators
Mm-hmm.
of this new music,
Yep.
and so it was when Braxton reached out to me in 76, 77, and brought me to New York. And then in 78, we had the large orchestra.
Yeah.
We performed at Murs Festival. Then we did a tour of the United States, Chicago, and we ended up in California, did a whole tour in California. So that whole period was not only refreshing for musicians, but I think it was refreshing for the audience as well, because they were hearing new music that was actually in its infant. This music was brand new to us as well, to the musicians. So the audience got a chance to experience this music before it got on record.
Yeah.
So it was a busy time for me. And even though Anthony Braxton and Sam Rivers and Cecil Taylor are so different in their music.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you before.
Braxton's music.
Musically, how did you manage, you know, to be in such different? I mean, they are in a way the same, but yet so different, like you said. Yeah.
Well, first of all, let's clear out. They are the same because there's always room for improvisation in all three guys. Okay, but Braxton's music was very structured. We had to rehearse. And Braxton, fortunately, was very in tune to musicians and how we felt, because sometimes he would call a rehearsal. We would be on the road and we would call a rehearsal, and all of a sudden, after we set up the rehearse, he says, "Hey, let's go and check out this movie. It's a movie down the street that I want to see." Little did I know, and these movies that he liked, they were monster movies. He really liked, I remember we were in Montreal. We had 5 days in Montreal in the 70s, and there was a movie theater right next door to the club where we were working. We were working in a club called the Rising Sun. And so once we got all set up, he says, "Look, let's go and watch," because Godzilla and Rudan, yes, they were playing, and little did I know Braxton, I figured it out. Braxton was getting some ideas of music that he could add into his score because he was playing bass saxophone at the time. So if you listen to the score of Godzilla, it has these low tones that are very low on the instrument and sustained. And Braxton brought that kind of music from the that he heard in monster movies. He brought that into his score. So Braxton's music was very structured. And that's what I learned from working with Braxton. Now, Sam Rivers was just the opposite. Just the opposite. First of all, we didn't rehearse. The only time we rehearsed was when we were making a recording. But when we were on tour, we never rehearsed. And I want you to know, my first gig with the Sam Rivers Quartet with Joe Daly on tuba, Dave Holland bass, was at the Left Bank Jazz Society in Baltimore. And that gig prepared me for what was to come, because our first set was an hour and a half.
Oh, man.
So what I learned from Sam Rivers was how to pace yourself in a performance. Because my first gig, I played everything I knew in a half an hour. And for the next hour, I was lost. I had done everything I knew. And I learned Thurman. That was an important lesson for me. So I learned how to pace myself. But with Sam Rivers, it was very special because I got a chance to play all the different styles of music that's out there. I got a chance to play contemporary European music. First of all, Sam would start on this on piano.
Mm.
He would begin every performance on piano. And from piano, we would move into contemporary European piano music. Then, when he moved from piano to soprano saxophone, then I knew we were getting ready to go into tempo. But not yet. Dave Holland was the one who always started the tempo.
Mm.
And I learned to wait for Dave. Remember, there's no rehearsal. We
Wow.
just went on stage
Amazing.
and played. So therefore, I felt in the beginning, I was exposed. I was naked on stage. I didn't know what to play, you see. But what I learned how to do was to listen. So I listened to Dave Holland. I listened to Sam Rivers. And I listened to Joe Daly. And I knew after 2 or 3 concerts, then I knew it was about bringing some of my own experience to what Sam Rivers was doing. That's what he wanted in the band. He didn't want me to copy what he was doing. He didn't want me to follow what he was doing. He wanted me to play his music the way I interpret it. And so playing with Sam, I felt I completed, we played the whole spectrum of music. Contemporary European music, bebop. When he played the tenor saxophone, we played bebop. When he played the flute, we got into world music, calypso, mambo, that kind of. So after a concert with Sam Rivers, you felt that you had completed the whole cycle of these many different styles. Now, we get to Cecil Taylor. And I want you to know, the guy who brought me in the band in 1986 was Steve McCall.
Okay.
He had done his work with Gunther Hampel, and he was in transition, working with Cecil at the time. Leroy Jenkins was in the band.
Yep.
Steve McCall was going out, I think, to Europe, and he asked Cecil, the manager, give Thurman Barker a call. I never will forget, on Thanksgiving Day, I received a phone call from Cecil's manager. And I thought it was a joke. My daughter, we're sitting down having Thanksgiving dinner, and the phone rings. My daughter answers it. And she said, "It's for you, Dad." And I said, "Tell him I'll call him back. I'm having Thanksgiving dinner." And my daughter relays the message, hangs up. The phone rings again immediately. And the voice on the other end says, he should take this call because it's Cecil Taylor. And right again, I said, this must be a joke. So I pick up the phone and I said, "Who's calling?" And they said, "This is the manager of Cecil Taylor, and he wants you to join the band." And I said, "Is this the Cecil Taylor who plays piano?" And they said, "Yes, it's the Cecil Taylor who plays piano." I said, "Oh my goodness." I told my family, "You won't believe this. Cecil Taylor's on the end of the phone." And my wife, she knows who Cecil is. Anyway, long story short, I joined Cecil's band. Our first gig is in Berlin. We're there for a week, which was perfect. We gave master classes. We did rehearsals with some of the local musicians, and we gave 2 concerts right there in Berlin, and that was my awakening to the music of Cecil Taylor. And it took an adjustment, and the difference of Cecil's music. Cecil's music is all about texture. It's not so much about notes. Cecil's music operates in a tonality that is a combination of dissonant and consonant sounds.
Mm.
But mostly it's about texture, how instruments work together.
Yep.
And number 2, Cecil's music, you read it horizontal, down, up, down, up, down, up. You see, it doesn't read like straight across the page. No, it doesn't work like that. Okay, because each measure has its own tonality and cluster. You see, so each instrument is lined up, and when all the instruments are in, then we go back up to the top to the next column. And that took some adjustments, okay? There was a contemporary conductor and composer in Chicago by the name of Ralph Shapey. And he led an ensemble at the University of Chicago in the 60s. And it was called the Contemporary Chamber Music. I bring this up because I used to sub for my percussion teacher, who was the principal percussionist with the ensemble. And I used to sub for him on some of these rehearsals. And I saw that his music was very similar, I remember, to what Cecil was doing. And in order for these composers to get the kind of music that they want, they had to change the way they wrote music for musicians to interpret them, okay? And so as a result, I remained with Cecil from 1986 to, I would say, to 94, 95, because we did a duo concert together.
Oh, wow, man.
Yes. You should look that up. That is available. You should look it up on YouTube.
I will.
We did
amazing.
In Frankfurt. Frankfurt, Germany brought Cecil and myself to Frankfurt to do a concert, a duo concert. And it was great because this was the first time that I had my whole arsenal. I had marimba, I had concert bass drum, snare drum, timpani, orchestra bells, all kinds of toys. I had a gong rack, because that was what I requested. If I was going to play a duo concert with Cecil Taylor, I need as much arsenal as I can get.
Definitely, yeah.
You understand what I mean? Anyway, that was 95 was the last time. And so from the experience of the AACM with Joseph Drummond, the experience with Dr. Muhal Richard Abrams, the experience with working with Calipurusha, the experience with working with Roscoe Mitchell. I
Yeah.
never will forget. My first concert with Roscoe Mitchell took place in 1966.
Wow, so early.
Yes, I think I was 16 at the time. And Roscoe Mitchell organized a concert. The student union at the University of Chicago organized a concert series, and one of the series was the Roscoe Mitchell Quartet with Andrew Hill on piano.
Oh man, my favorite.
And Wilbur Ware on bass.
Wow.
And myself on drums, and Roscoe Mitchell. Now, keep in mind, I didn't really know who Andrew Hill was at the time. But when I looked him up, I could not believe that Roscoe had put me in the company of Andrew Hill and Wilbur Ware. And Wilbur Ware never forgot that concert, because when I visited New York for the first time in 72, I went to, I looked in the Village Voice to see where the music was, and I saw Elvin Jones Quartet was working at Snooky's Pub, and I immediately went down to Snooky's Pub that night, and the bass player was Wilbur Ware. And Wilbur told Elvin, look, you got to hear this kid. He's from Chicago. Let him sit in. Let him sit in. And the next thing I knew, there I was sitting in on Elvin Jones' drums
man,
and
really?
his gig.
Wow.
So
Crazy.
this was the camaraderie around the music during the 60s in Chicago, and in the early 70s in New York, and the 80s. There was a communication going on, and musicians they were communicating, but they had a little more control of their bands and what they were doing, you know.
Yeah. Sure.
I'm doing an interview. I'll call you back. So anyway, that was it was a very special period, and unfortunately now things are quite a bit different. So, like I mentioned in the early part of this interview, fortunately I've turned my attention to teaching and the experience of with the AECM. I have, and my experience with Anthony Braxton and Sam Rivers and Cecil Taylor. I am about sharing that experience in my teaching and getting young people involved with this music that that they missed out on.
Yep.
You know, and I say that because now it's kind of hard to find jazz. It's hard to find music these days. So I do, when I taught at Bard College for 30 years, I made a point of introducing my students to the music of the AECM and the music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s that is a little hard to find these days.
Yeah.
So
beautiful.
And also getting them familiar with some of the artists, like Jerome Cooper, you know, Douglas Ewart, a lot of folks that the Millennium people might not know much about.
Yeah.
And I made a point of introducing them to the innovators of these of the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah. which you were a part of.
because
So,
it's
you
going to
know,
be
I mean,
up to
that's,
us.
yeah,
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 I'm a part of it. I can speak from experience.
exactly. That's the most
Okay, I
important.
can speak from experience. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thurman, I will not take more of your time, but thanks for sharing some of these thoughts. I could hear you, I could listen to you for hours. It's just we could do album by album, and you could, you know.
Yes, yes. Well, next time, will you please shoot me an email of your address?
I will. Thank you so much. Really.